grades. Honestly, it's hard to think of a single one thing in education, teaching, and learning that can be the most controversial, that can cause the most stress, and honestly is as overblown as grades are. Yes, that's right. The teacher just said grades are overblown. Why do I say that? Well, today we're going to talk about 3 perhaps not so well-kept secrets about grades, grading, and teaching, and why at the end of the day, you probably shouldn't be worrying quite so much about that grade that you got on the last test. Let's take a look. It's hard to imagine a world where education doesn't have grades. I mean, we have transcripts, we have GPAs, we have class rankings, etc., etc. The list could go on forever and ever. But it actually might surprise you to learn that grading and grades, as we know them, at least in the Western world, are a relatively recent addition to education. In fact, if you go back a few hundred years to the first formal education in Europe's universities and colleges and things like that, they didn't really have grades, at least not in any way that we would recognize them. When you went to the university, you did the studies, you passed or didn't, and you got your diploma, and that was it. There was no A, there was no B, or anything like that. Really, grades came from about the age of the Industrial Revolution, when education did start to become more widespread. And when that happened, we needed an objective way to evaluate students. We just simply couldn't form the sort of relationships that are necessary for the qualitative or quality-based assessment that used to dominate before then. So that's when grades, the A, B, C, etc. scale started to come into play. So when we talk about, oh, we grade things because we've always graded them, that's not entirely true. We love to talk about grades as being an objective way to analyze a student's performance. That's why we have them, after all. Well, surprise number 2, that's not entirely true. Although yes, we as teachers do pride ourselves on being objectives as much as possible, at the end of the day, there's actually a lot more subjectivity to grades than we might let on. How might that work? So, at the end of a grading period, all of us, all teachers, professors, whatever, look at our grades and we look how students have actually been doing in class. So let's say I have a student who started out really struggling at the beginning of a grading period, maybe bombed a test or something because they just didn't really understand the material. But then they turn around, they worked hard, they came to get help, they formed the close student-teacher relationship, and at the end of the grading period, they actually did have a lot of progress, but just mathematically, it wasn't possible for them to make an A. Well, if I see that, they're going to get that A. I am going to change that grade. Much more rarely, if I have a student who, by the books, maybe they just really learned how to take tests well, but they haven't really shown mastery, or they haven't really been a positive contributor to my class, and they're mathematically sitting on an A, they're not going to get that A. They're going to get the grade I think they deserve. And if you look at syllabi, if you look at course descriptions in a lot of different teachers' courses, you will see some sort of clause that says, essentially, we can adjust grades at the end of a grading period based on what we think a student truly deserves. So the final big secret that I want to share with you, and this is actually something I hope will reassure people, grades, they don't really matter all that much. Now, I know that might be a little bit surprising to hear coming from a teacher, given especially how much time and effort we spend grading, but in the big scheme of things, they don't matter. Especially when you look at grades that students get in lower school, junior high, a lot of times those grades aren't even going to be seen by a college or anything like that. And even your high school grades that are important for college admissions, after you get into that college, they don't matter. And now I say that as a student who was very obsessed with grades. I was the top of my class and I was very competitive about that. Not exactly something that I'm proud of, but that is my background. And I remember when I graduated, valedictorian, I discovered, yeah, most people don't care. Now, that's not saying that grades can't be a useful tool, and there are definitely times when grades do matter, but unless you leave or go stay in academia, grades aren't really going to matter once you have that first job. No one's really going to care that you got an A in 4th grade math class or a B in high school chemistry. They honestly don't care. Grades don't matter. But What does matter is the learning that those grades are supposed to represent and the relationships that you form with your teachers. So don't worry so much about grades, because in the long run, they're probably not going to matter. And that can sometimes come as a shock for students who are extremely academically successful, because those grades stop mattering. And a lot of times students put a lot of their life and their energy into those grades. And it could be, like I said, a little bit of a shock when they graduate and discover that that effort wasn't as well spent as they thought. Instead, focus on learning. Focus on developing good relationships with your teachers. That is what is going to last a lifetime. That B you got in high school chemistry doesn't really matter. The chemistry that you learned and the relationships that you had, those productive professional relationships, those are what matter. So obsess about those and let the grades happen on their own.